What is up with these owls anyways? What do they do? So these are flying support units that are similar to clerics, but are more utility oriented, and they kind of interact with the enemies a little bit more. I would say they're slightly worse at support in terms of keeping your team alive than clerics, but slightly better at interacting with the enemy and kind of shutting them down. In terms of stats, they tend to have lower HP, lower physical attack and defense, very high magic defense, good magic attack, which basically just scales their healing, average accuracy, they have good evasion, and they have average or above average initiative, like somewhere in that range. So they are a staff flying caster beastrel, and like with most flying classes, as the party leader they have 4 stamina. They also have an assist type of healing and 150 mobility, which is decent. They can provide healing assists. They also ignore terrain and trap effects because they're flying, and just like all beastrels, they have increased mobility at night and a slight increase to stats at night. So let's go over the skills. Okay, Aurora Veil grants HP regeneration to a row of allies. So HP regeneration is allies get healed a little bit when they use actions, right? Like when they use their active points. So it can be situationally useful if you're in longer fights where you're going to be using a lot of abilities and skills, but it also gives 50% magic defense. Now, in terms of what this does, it's not an active heal. And by that I mean it doesn't heal right away. It's like a delayed heal. And if you need healing right now or you're gonna die by the next enemy's attack, this is not the skill. The magic defense is nice, and the regen can be useful if you have tanky units. But it's typically a little bit worse than other heals. But let's go into this. All right, night vision. Grants a row of allies plus 50 accuracy at night, makes it true strike. Now this is decent for hit fixing, but I would argue if your team is set up correctly, you should never need this ever. The true strike can be situationally nice, but your team should really be able to function without something like this. If you plan on needing plus 50 accuracy to hit, the units you're using are probably not the best units. The best classes in the game typically don't have hit issues unless they're fighting things that have abnormally high avoid or the evade mechanic, and this can help fight that. But there are also other things like gear that allows units to give themselves true strike, and there's also other sources of true strike that are more reliable. Extra heal. This one I actually think is decent. Restore moderate HP to an ally, grants HP regeneration and initiative plus 30. So this accelerates a slow unit while also healing them and giving them regen, which just allows them to act sooner. So this could be used with slower units or even just on medium speed units to get them to be faster than the enemy. So this can be quite nice if this unit is faster than the enemy, which requires her to be initiative boosted herself. Restore activates after an ally uses passive skill, grants ally +1 passive point. This is really good. This is like a passive point battery. I think this is one of the things that really sets this class apart from other things. Now, have I been able to leverage this and make really good team comps that stomp using things like Restore? No, and the reason is the things that stomp kill too quickly for this to matter. In PvP, I could see this being fantastic for combos and things like this, and obviously Quick Dispel is great in PvP. But beyond that, I don't really see it being super huge value. It can be decent in some combos, but most combos are more straightforward and simplistic and don't need this level of batterying. So it can be decent when used in a certain way, but I don't think it's the best thing. I'll go over like the build I'm running on this thing. Quick Dispel. Remove all buffs from a single enemy. This is one of their best skills. It doesn't really have much interaction against things in PvE. In PvP and like in the Coliseum battles, this can be valuable. Like let's say an enemy is going to impetus you or something and board nuke you, you can just quick dispel the impetus and then they just don't get to do it. so it's pretty good. But in PvE, I don't think it really has a lot of value. Circle Barrier activates before allies attacked. Reduce damage taken by all allies by 25% for one attack. This actually is pretty good. This is good for damage mitigation, especially if there's like some big attack that's going off, and this is the difference between dying or not. So this is pretty decent value. And then of course they have Farsight, increases visibility by 100%, and increases range by 50% for allied units within range. Now visibility is for like maps where you can't see due to various conditions, and there aren't really many of those, so in that way that's not really super useful, but the assist range is decent, and it lasts for 20 seconds, and it's cheap, so it's not bad. Alright, so this loadout is literally just a battery. You give things, you give up to 2 active points to other things, and then you just spam restore. So after ally uses passive skill. So as soon as she Rage of the Fairies, she gets a passive skill back. What is this? Level 45. Why does she not have her board nuke? It's weird. For some reason her board nuke's taken off. But you could set her up so that she can do this, so that she can board nuke twice if you really need it. Typically you just sniper lens her and she's good to go. She'll kill like pretty much everything you attack, or most things. But if you didn't want to use sniper lens, you could get like a second elemental roar set up potentially. So like Rage of the Fairies, let me go to this active heal. We can just set it to highest magic attack, which is what she is in this group. So she would Rage of the Fairies, get a passive point, and then she would elemental roar, elemental impetus, get another passive point, and then get active healed. And then the elemental impetus would give her an active point. The active heal gives her an active point, and then she get elemental roar again. So that'd be an example of like a little setup. So something fun you could do. Is this like... Honestly, I feel like this class is missing some things. Like I think Circle Bear is one of the better things it can do if you're not using it as a battery. The extra heal. It's also only single target for 2 active points, which is quite a high cost. There are other things too. There are like other utility staffs, like you always run this and try to just go for like spam healing. But the regen thing, I'm not a huge fan of. I like active heals, I feel like those are better. Protection can be good. Activates for allies attacked, reduce damage taken by a row of allies. So if you want to run like some kind of like protection build, you could have this use protection on whoever is attacked. And unfortunately you can't combine these. So, but you can use either or. This is better for row attacks because it reduces the damage by 50%, whereas this is... Really, there aren't enemy board nukes, so I don't really know why you would use this for an ally's attack. I guess you could trigger this on like front row to give everyone... You could do something like this. You could have it like front row, and then this could just be back row. And the idea would be if your front row gets attacked, and then you could also set up a condition where you have 3 or more passive points. So what you would do here is if the front row is attacked, give everyone a 25% damage reduction. And then if the back row is attacked, reduce it further by 50%. So then the back row is a 75% damage reduction. Something like this could be decent. And then of course you could run like Aurora Veil. Just put this here. So this also increases magic defense, and you could, it doesn't have to necessarily be the front row. You could do like front row first action or something, and this would just give them more magic tanking and HP. Now I do think this is strictly worse than Sainted Knight, if I'm being honest. I think this is just a worse class than Sainted Knight. I think Sainted Knight is like the best support right now in the game. It's not even close. What can Sainted Knight do? Negates magic attacks to a single target, negates magic attacks to a row heals. Look at the heal on that thing. It's just so hard to compete with this class. It can actually deal damage, it can get cav boosted from calves. You could put a shield on it, it can cover, it can run any utility shield, it can run any sword, there's a lot of good swords, it can runic blade for damage. It's basically just worse Sainted Knight in my opinion. But it can be useful, and unlike Sainted Knight, this can battery if you really want to, but I don't know that batteries matter unless you're doing like PvP, which I don't do enough of to really have opinions on. But yeah, like the things it has access to, I feel like Cleric just has better heals than this, so it has like some decent things though. Like I feel like this, if these stack, which I'm assuming they do, they don't stack at the same time, you'd have to use these separately. So like the front row gets attacked, everyone gets 25% damage reduction, back row gets attacked, if it gets attacked, all the back row gets a 50% damage reduction, even if it's a single hit. So if an enemy just like shoots you with a bow or something, you have the damage on the target and then the other 2 units for future row attacks or for future back attacks, whatever it is, or even column attacks, just get a damage reduction. And then of course, Restore can be situationally useful, Quick Dispel can be situationally useful. Restore is a combo piece, potentially. At this state in the game right now, at this stage of the game, like in its development, the board nukes that kill don't need that much support, so like giving them more active and passive points currently doesn't matter at all. So maybe other builds it does, but those builds are just arguably worse if they require a second unit to buff them in this way. But overall, it's a serviceable class that has some interesting things. I like the Dispel mostly. Protection, I'm sorry, Circle Barrier is interesting. It also could combo well with like a Shaman, because like the Shaman can kill the damage and then you can reduce it even further. So if you are still getting damaged. And the nice thing about this too is it works in response, so it doesn't matter what your initiative is. So if some fast thing attacks you for big damage, you just reduce it by 25%. So that's kind of nice. But beyond that, I think it has kind of like weaker heals. So I'm not a huge fan of those, but Quick Dispel, I wish if the enemies had harder team comps to deal with, this would become much better. Like if the enemies had impetus combos or even just like big buffs that were a serious problem, this thing would be much better. Now, I don't know if this can dispel bosses. If it can, this makes it a little bit better for certain boss fights. But even when you can't dispel bosses, there's still other ways to remove buffs. Everyone in the game has access, or at least all the classes that can attack, have access to, where is it? This guy. Vanishing Punishment. Activates after an ally attacks, follow up a single enemy, removes all buffs. So it kind of has less value because things like this exist, and anyone at any time can just grab this and just strip buffs on pursuit. So unfortunately for this class, it does not have. Now obviously Quick Dispel is nice because it's almost like an interrupt, like in Magic the Gathering, where it's like someone's casting a spell and then you counterspell it. So it's kind of like a counterspell. So it has some interesting interaction. So more utility, more enemy interaction, less straight up support and healing than like Sainted Knight, and less support and healing. And by support, I mean like keeping things alive. So this is more like aggressive, where it can like hit fix, give True Strike, dispel enemies, restore passive points to enable something to be more aggressive, which is typically how you're going to be using that. So for example, if you run this with like a Werefox who uses their passive abilities before the enemy does anything and starts restoring them, it can be pretty valuable for like those weird combos for that. Typically those combos are lower damage than board nukes, but they can still be like, you know, good and beat the game and stuff like this. They just do it at a slower rate or not as efficiently. But yeah, that's it for WEREOWL. I would put this class in like B tier. It's decent, it's serviceable, it has access to all the utility staffs like Res and Barrier, and you know, things like Holy Cradle if you ever want to use these. Stuff like this. And yeah, I think there's better options though, but it can easily beat the game. The game is not that hard where you have to run the best things. I don't want to get that point across where it's like, oh, you have to run the best things. I want to make sure I put my stance on it out there where you can easily beat the game with anything. So if you really like the WEREOWL, you can easily beat the game with it. All right, definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next one. Peace.